Eyes Wide Shut is a film about a relationship and how jealousy can cause people to enter into states of mind that are almost dreamlike, where our unconscious desires and insecurities lead us to do things that we would never do had we not been under the influence of jealousy's drug-like effects. But people try to make it about more than that. Epstein files, hidden meanings, Donald Trump looking exactly like this mask. Okay, that's actually really weird. But guys, we are missing the beauty of the film's story, adapted from this book, and in the process, we're losing sight of the actual hidden meanings of the film, which are actually way more fun than this Epstein BS, which I actually got caught up in not long ago, but thanks to ADHD and coffee, I'm on to this new idea, so let's go. In 2026, it's not every day that a movie from 1999 is one of the most talked about movies on YouTube. But Eyes Wide Shut has a huge fan base and audience that's researching this topic online on a weekly basis, it seems. And I'm glad because this is one of my favorite movies of all time. Now, it's easy to have a lot of fun. You know, the first time you watch this movie, you get the chills running down your back. The hair on the back of your neck stands up. It's spooky when you relate it to what's going on in the world today. But I think it kind of does an injustice to the storytelling, the cinematography, and the directing, as well as the performances, namely of Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise in this case, when we, sit and go into the conspiracy theory aspects of this movie, which in the long run, while it is an adrenaline rush, and you can go back and look at one of my recent videos to see that I'm guilty of it as well. In the long run, it takes away from how amazing this actual film is and how it's not just about these sick monsters that everybody's talking about lately, including myself. I'm not here to say that I've never done it, but let's get into what this thing is actually about. I mean, this is based on a book, and the book was actually aiming to accomplish the same things that people are saying Stanley was aiming to accomplish with the film 100 years ago when it was written. And then also in the 60s when somebody else made it into a movie first, before Stanley, they were doing the same thing. So let's get into the book, then the first movie, which is called Dream Story. Okay, so Traumnovelle is actually a story from 1926, right? A novella by the Austrian author Arthur Schnitzler. All right, so this is a doctor, Fridolin, right? That's the main character. He's Bill in the book. He embarks on a surreal, dreamlike journey through Vienna's underworld after his wife confesses a sexual fantasy. So it explores themes of desire, jealousy, and the blurred lines between dreams and reality. And the reason this book is noteworthy are a few things that make it stand out. This character, Schnitzler, the author of Dream Story, aka Traumnovelle, would hang around with Carl Jung and, Freud. So, this was a very, very well-received book at the time. And what Schnitzler was trying to do was actually tell a story, not necessarily about characters dreaming at all, and that's the misconception about the film and the book, but rather a story that unfolds rather like a dream. And then I think Kubrick wanted to bring that to life visually, and that's the catalyst for making the movie. Anyone he was trying to call out, or any hidden occult meanings or anything like that might be added in secondarily. The first thing that's most important is Stanley Kubrick. You could look this up. Is quoted as having said, "I want to change the form." And he was frustrated with film's form at the time, and he was bored with it in many ways. And he changed, and I believe the way he changed the form of the art of filmmaking is to produce a movie which to the viewer unfolds like a dream. Similar to 2001: A Space Odyssey, 30 years prior, the audience member would go to the movie. It was like going on a ride, an attraction, like a roller coaster, right? That's what Stanley was out to accomplish with Eyes Wide Shut. Everything else is fun to think about, but we have to get down to the story and the technique of storytelling, which was designed to unfold like a drug or a dream and actually cause us to do things that we are doing based on unconscious factors, which is a really good example of why we do anything in life, but this movie explores it, and it does relate it to how a dream might unfold. The fact that Stanley considered this a monument in storytelling is the reason he created the film. Not to call out anyone specifically, because Stanley wanted to make this movie ever since the 60s or 70s, so it wouldn't make any sense to say he was always wanting to call out somebody specifically. So this brings me to an important point, which I've been getting into a little bit since the beginning of this video, which is that people don't mention the book when they talk about this movie. It's like there's a whole community on YouTube of people trying to figure out what Stanley was trying to say with his last story. Okay, it's not Stanley's story. In fact, he worked with authors and writers of books, not just of movies, to make this into a filmable story and adapt it from the book properly, because it's all based on the book. Stanley added 2 elements that I'll get into in this series, but it's not Stanley's story, so we have to get out of that whole mindset of what was Stanley trying to tell us. It's what was Schnitzler trying to tell us. Not about modern times or people or Epstein, anything like that. It's just the way he told this story. He told it like the way a dream unfolds, okay? We don't have to get all ethereal about it. Just think of it like that. And Stanley wanted to bring that onto the screen as a challenge since he was a young man. Listen to Candia McWilliam talk about the writing process. Candia was hired by Stanley to work on the script before shooting began. She wasn't listed as one of the writers of the film. He just worked with her to develop the story from the book to the screen.
Story at that point was very clearly about the mutual manipulation of jealousy, which is torture. It's what we can do to one another in the most intimately painful way. And it's clearly quite obvious that if you're dealing with erotic entanglement, there is a compulsion to hurt that lies very close to intense involvement.
But it seems...
Okay, so the reason I show you that clip is to show you a woman that Stanley worked with to develop this story and to bring the following themes to the screen. How jealousy makes us do things that we don't necessarily want to do, but our unconscious pain is causing us to do. That's what Bill goes through in Eyes Wide Shut. And then she mentions how it can force us to unknowingly hurt people emotionally really badly. That's what, that's what Alice does to Bill in the movie. It's a little bit far-fetched. I mean, that might be one of the only criticisms of the movie. Like, does this guy actually go on a psychological bender just because she tells him that she was fantasizing about a naval officer? And honestly, now that I think about it, it is possible, and the movie heightens it to a certain extent, like a dream is heightened, right? And then it's not about the cult party. It's not about the masquerade ball. That's all very normal. They go to these parties all the time. Not necessarily the masked cult party, but what I'm saying is the masked cult party is just a heightened version of the party that Bill and Alice go to in the very beginning of the movie. Just like you might do something in real life and then dream about a heightened cinematic version of it. That party is just a cinematic version of what Bill is experiencing at the first party at the very beginning of the movie. And we can get into that as the series goes on as well. So what we have here is an excerpt from the book Traumnovelle. Fridolin and Albertina were glad to have escaped from a disappointingly commonplace masquerade prank, and soon sat like 2 lovers among the other couples in the buffet eating oysters and drinking champagne. They chatted. So they're at this party, right? This is the same party in the movie, although in the book it's portrayed as a party they went to, an upper class type of party, yes, but it featured some type of masquerade prank, perhaps like a party activity, a prank of some type. Somebody wasn't expecting it, perhaps. But at this party, there is a masked portion, okay? So what Schnitzler is doing in the book is saying, oh, he already went to a party where they wore masks. This next event where he goes to, which is even more masked, is like a dream compared to the first one. In other words, it's almost like he experienced this first party where there was a mask prank, and then the second party is like a heightened, cinematic, mysterious version, or like a dreamlike version of that first party. In the movie, Kubrick didn't do this. It would have been perhaps too cheesy, too obvious. People would have said, oh, this is just a mirroring of that first masked scene we saw. Fridolin and Albertina obviously are Bill and Alice in the movie. It may have been too obvious. It may have ruined the story structurally for some reason that I don't quite understand. But Stanley changed that from book to movie, so that is another thing that he changed. 99% of the book is the same as the movie. This 1% is what we're talking about now. But basically, if the end of the movie is the big thing is that Stanley changes the book from the daughter going into their bedroom, and it's kind of a happy ending if you take it that way. Stanley changes it to they're in like an F.A.O. Schwartz type place in New York City, and the daughter walks away at the end to go look at toys, and I guess many people, including myself, are left to have fun, conjecturing, if that's a word, about, did they sell her? So that would be something Stanley would have added in. It's not in the book whatsoever. The book is a book is always going to be more open to interpretation just because it lacks that visual element, but Stanley did add in, they weren't in their bedroom in the final scene, they were in a toy store. I think it's to juxtapose the darkness with that brightness of like a fluorescent light, white tile floor toy store surrounded by all these colors, primary colors, but it's open to interpretation. Let's go over the book one more time just so we can compare. So in the book, Schnitzler writes, "What shall we do now, Albertina?" And that's Fridolin or Bill asking Albertina or Alice. She says, "I think we ought to be grateful that we have come unharmed out of all our adventures, whether they were real or only a dream." "Are you quite sure of that?" he asked. "Just as sure as I am that the reality of one night, let alone that of a whole lifetime, is not the whole truth. And no dream," he said with a slight sigh, "is entirely a dream." She took his head and pillowed it on her breast. "Now I suppose we are awake," she said, "for a long time to come." He was on the point of saying forever, but before he could speak, she laid her finger on his lips and whispered, as if to herself, "Never inquire into the future." So they lay silently, dozing a little, dreamlessly, close to one another, until, as on every morning at 7, there was a knock on the door, and, with the usual noises from the street, a victorious ray of light through the opening of the curtain, and the clear laughter of a child through the door, the new day began. And that's the end of Schnitzler's book. So what Schnitzler is doing is breaking down what happened to the two characters throughout the book. Obviously, Alice is talking about the two adventures that they experienced. Alice's was the dream, where she had, intercourse with lots of different people, and then she was laughing. That happens in the book, right? And then the adventure for Bill, or Fridolin, obviously was, almost getting HIV in the movie. In the book, it's almost being seduced by a prostitute, and then going to that party where who knows what could have happened. He could have been killed, apparently. At the end, he was saved by Mandy, which also happens in the book. Mandy has a different name. So it's really not that... it's not like some cloud floating around with meaning that's hard to put together. Schnitzler pretty much lays it out for us 100%. So much so, in fact, that I think Stanley veered away from explaining too much to the audience, and that's where the mystery of the film actually takes over. He made the movie super mysterious. Maybe it's just, he figured, hey, people, maybe if they just read the book, they'll understand what's going on here. The conspiracies aside, this isn't like a hard movie to understand or anything like that. Obviously when I first saw the movie, I was really young actually, so I didn't understand what was going on at the end of the movie. So obviously the other thing that's different than the book is she doesn't say, there's one thing that is very important that we need to do is, F or whatever. So why did Stanley sexualize the movie so much? Why did he hypersexualize it? Basically, this was 1999 where he was making his movie, or 1997 through 1998-ish, late 98, and then it came out in 99. The stuff in the book wasn't taboo in 1990, in the late 90s. The stuff in the book was taboo in 1926. So, of course, he had to make it more salacious. He had to make it more incredible, unbelievable, and tantalizing. And, was he pointing the finger at, like, an Epstein character? Yeah, I mean, I don't know who gave him that knowledge. Hint, hint, wink, wink, if you want to go back and check out who the media coordinator or the media, not supervisor, but consultant on the film was. A guy named Larry Salona, a writer in New York City for the New York Post, I believe. he may have gotten ideas from people like the people he was hiring to make the story fit within modern times, because it wasn't 26 anymore, it was 97 or 98. So it's not that crazy to figure out why he went above and beyond. He went a little overboard on the sexual occultism, because that's what was being described in 1926 in a much less hardcore way, because that wouldn't have flown in 1926. In 1926, Schnitzler's writing was viewed as extremely, almost, pornographic for no other reason than he was simply writing about intercourse. So, Kubrick had to at least come close, and he couldn't just have naked people on screen. That wouldn't have been enough. So that's where the occultism comes from. Normal sex wouldn't be taboo enough. It had to be occult. That's my opinion on that. I want to get into more of this. I want to move on to other great movies, though. The mysterious, the occult, the confusing, and the psychological. I guess that's what we're all kind of interested in on this channel right now. It's the New Media Review Weekly. My name's Joe. We have a long-form podcast on Spotify. I'm going to post this actual video to Spotify as the podcast for this week. Let me know if you really like this content. You're going to have to subscribe and comment and keep an eye out with notifications for future videos. But like I said, it's the New Media Review Weekly. My name's Joe. Thanks for tuning in.